Hello, good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for being here. We know that it's quite late. Before we start, I would like to thank the Mediterranean Pavilion for enabling us to present our work here. And thank you very much. I think one of the main things that, or the main focuses that we noticed today is like that. It's not a surprise at all that climate change is affecting the Mediterranean, especially Middle East and North Africa, in a way that actually is very serious. And there is, if everyone in the region cannot don't work together, then it will be like not pleasant for all of us. So, in the last 3 years, a group of researchers from the University of Oxford, from Jordan, Israel, and Palestine, together with the Track 2 initiative at the Rava Institute, started working on a transboundary project that's mainly using science and research in order to evaluate the resources in the region. Mainly, we look into transboundary resources, including water and energy, between Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. And in order to come up with scenarios or to look to see actually how regional cooperation can help us all in overcoming the effect of climate change in the region. So today we will have speakers both from the region, from the Middle East, and also from the UK. Based on the order of how they will speak, I will introduce them. So first of all, we have Professor Richard Kaplan, Professor of International Relations at the University of Oxford. After that, we will have Dr. Nourid Gal, who's also a research fellow at the University of Oxford, and she will present our work on energy. Then Dr. Michael Gilmont will also present our work on water. And after that, Dr. Shaddad Atili will join us online, and he will present the importance of our work in the region for both the different partners, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. And at the end, Dr. Tariq Abu Hamad, the director of the Rava Institute for Environmental Studies, will give us some final remarks and tell us also about how this work can be taken further and affect all what we are doing. So to start with, Professor Richard, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Very pleased that you could join us this afternoon. We've been talking throughout the day, indeed the last several days, I'm sure, about regional cooperation and the benefits of regional cooperation. And as Suleiman has just been saying, this project has been examining the prospects for and potential benefits of regional cooperation over the management of transboundary resources, energy and water in particular, in Israel, Jordan, Palestine. We've also been working in the East Nile River Basin with Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, with respect to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's a parallel project. It has certain principles, if you will, in common with what we're doing in Israel, Jordan, Palestine, but they are distinct. And I just want to say that we've gone into this with eyes wide open, by which I mean that we're not dogmatic about regional cooperation. We are very evidence-based, evidence-orientated in the work that we're doing, and that's one of the key aspects of this work. In other words, we are gathering and looking very, very carefully at the data and what the data, when we run it through various models, tell us about the potential for regional cooperation. And we have a slide here which lays out the approach that we're taking. It's really has two central components. The first, as I've alluded to, is modeling and forecasting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment, and then two of our speakers will go into more detail with the model. But the second aspect is a bottom-up track 2 engagement where we work together with specialists, experts from the region in which we're engaged, but also, I guess, what you could call a track 1.5 engagement, 1.5 engagement, where we're working with former senior officials who are well connected, who can, if you will, bend the ear of actual elected and appointed officials. So it's really, in a way, from the bottom up and the top down. And there's a reason for that. I'll talk about that in just a moment as well. But let me just say a few words about the modeling, which you can see, I hope, on this slide. It's what you might call a simulation or an infrastructure planning model, and this is with respect specifically now to energy. There's a different approach, but in the same spirit, to water. But this allows us to take in consideration relevant inputs, including the costs and availability of energy from various sources: gas, solar, wind, batteries, diesel, coal, shale, also electricity demand, the renewables targets of each of the 3 jurisdictions, the emissions targets, and so forth, and to explore what different scenarios would yield, the scenarios ranging from non-cooperation to varying degrees of regional cooperation, and cooperation understood as the amount of cross-border electricity trade under a given scenario. And similarly, we map different water use and generation scenarios, and also the prospects for regional cooperation, something which Michael Gilmont will talk about in just a few moments. Going back to what I was saying about the track 2 and track 1.5, I think that there are some very important features of the work that we're doing, and one is, I think it's fair to say that as a consequence of very meticulous efforts at gathering data, we have some of the most robust data that has been available for this kind of analysis. And that's really only been possible because we have been able to work with, enlist the support of regional experts, many of whom in the region have not known even what the data has been in other neighboring jurisdictions. So I think that in this respect, certainly, this is I think it's fair to say, a state-of-the-art project. And so, as I said, that's been very, very important. We've been doing this together with the Track 2 Environmental Forum. But as I said, there's also been a significant Track 1.5 where former ministers, diplomats themselves have been advising us in opening doors, because ultimately what we're working towards are two things. One is to develop and promote a new narrative on national security and environmental risk, and we're already seeing movement in that direction in the region, where there's growing recognition of the importance of the environmental dimension to national security. So the jurisdictions in the region are thinking beyond the traditional, very narrow conceptions of national security, which were largely military, and recognizing increasingly that there is a very, very important environmental dimension to national security. And as you'll hear in just a moment, the evidence that we have found points to the benefits of regional cooperation, that they outweigh the alternatives of relying to varying degrees on one's own resources and capacities. And so what we're also trying to do is to promote acceptance of regional cooperation as a way forward, to promote this as a guiding principle for policy at national level throughout the region. So I think that's all I want to say in general terms, and then talk more specifically.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard, for that. And I would like also to highlight what Richard just mentions. Like, I think in this project, one of the main interesting outcomes is like the data that, or the model is mainly based on actual data. And this is maybe one of very few projects that actually using data, real data that's shared in the region between the different parties, which I think is very unique, and that can give like an evidence to the different countries involved in this research of how actually, based on their own data, what can happen and how the models work. Our next speaker is Dr. Nourid Gal, and she will focus on the energy component of the project. And Nourid, the floor is yours.
Can you use this? Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Okay. I'll use this. Okay, hello everyone. What I'm going to discuss is how the model is projecting the benefits of cross-border collaboration for meeting the renewable energy targets. So our starting point is the energy targets, the renewable targets of the entities in the region, which is Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinians. So both Israel and Jordan have a target of about 30% renewables by 2030, where Israel is far away. It's approaching 10% now, and Jordan is already almost meeting the target. The Palestinians have a target of 20%, but currently most of the Palestinians' energy is coming from Israel. The share of renewables is smaller than 20%. And the target of the project or the model is to see whether by collaboration, meeting this target will become easier, cheaper, and quicker. Okay. So first we need to understand that meeting the target is very challenging. These are the main 4 challenges that I see. So the first one on the left is the population growth of all these entities. Population is growing very rapidly in Israel by at least 2% by year. For the Palestinians, I think it's almost 3%. And in Jordan, due to immigration from Syria, population has been growing very rapidly over the year. So growing population means that the amount of renewable energy that we need just in order to keep stable the share of renewables is growing over time. You need more capacity just because the population is growing. So this is one challenge. The next challenge is the challenge of the land. So Israel is highly populated, the land is very small, and finding location for solar energy is challenging. Israel decided just last year to solve this challenge by dual use. So we cover water reservoirs, we cover agriculture, we cover rooftops, we cover everything because we do not have enough land. And yet finding enough location is the second challenge. The third challenge is the DAC curve. This is excess generation during noontime, because solar generation is of course generated during noon, and since there is not always enough demand during the winter or the fall and the spring, this means that during this noontime we will have excess generation. And finally, the grid connection. This is going to become Israel's main challenge because the main solar projects are located far away from the population, and therefore we need the grid in order to connect them. And building a grid in a highly populated country is also a challenge. So all this means, all these are the explanation why we find it difficult to meet the target. So currently, each country is actually struggling by itself separately to meet the target. This is a map, a simulation of the grid in both areas. And you see that the map in Israel is highly populated and very dense. And you see that the grid of Jordan. And the interesting part is there is always no connection, only an 18 megawatt connection connecting Jericho to Jordan. And that's it, while Israel is consuming over 14 gigawatt at the peak demand. So just a tiny amount, less than 1% of the energy can come from Jordan, and that is because the grids are not connected. This means that Israel is an electricity island currently, and we are building just on ourselves. And the purpose of this project is to see whether connecting the grid can make the targets easier to achieve. And now what we found is that there is a high potential for collaboration. First of all, because Israel lacks wind energy, while in Jordan there is a potential for wind. Mainly you can see this at the northern part of Jordan, you can see a potential for wind, while for Israel there is a tiny amount of potential wind project. In addition to that, the radiation is higher on the Jordanian side of the border. So which means that if we take a solar panel and we put it not in Israel but in Jordan, it will produce more energy. And therefore it is more cost effective to build the solar panels in the Jordanian side of the border. So this is an explanation of why collaboration can provide benefit. In addition to that, the demand profiles are not correlated because Israel has high share of air conditioning. So the peak demand of Israel occurs in August, while we use lots of air conditioning. And at the same time in Jordan, the use of air conditioning is smaller, and they consume most of the energy during the winter, the cold hours of the winter. This means since the demand is not correlated, it means that the same capacity can be used, some hours it can be used in the Israeli side, and in other hours it can be used in the Jordanian side. And this is another explanation why collaboration can benefit both countries. So as Richard just explained, we're using the same slide. So the model is actually a model of regional plan. So both, of course, Israel has already have a method for long-term planning, and the Jordanians are also using models for planning, but each country is using its own plan and it's focusing only on its own need. And for the first time, what we need is a regional, what we did is a regional plan. We took the overall demand of the region, not just of one country, the overall potential of solar and wind in each side, and the profile of generation of solar and wind in each side of the border. And what we did is we checked several scenarios. In one scenario, we are collaborating, and in another scenario, each country is continues to work solely and separately to meet the target. And the model is actually calculating the cost and the future capacity needed to meet the target, whether if we collaborate or not. And what we found is that the investment, if we increase the investment in Jordan, so the investment in Jordan would be met not only just to meet the Jordanian needs, but also to meet some of Israel needs for renewables. This can reduce the cost, the overall cost can be reduced by 9.4%. And that is because Jordan can provide wind energy, which is not available for Israel, and solar radiation is higher in the Jordanian side. This explains why we can increase the investment in the Jordanian side and at the same time reduce the overall investment. So this is one benefit of collaboration. And on top of that, we can reduce the amount of curtailment of energy. Since in Israel there are periods, and also the Jordanian side, there are periods where there is not enough demand, and therefore renewable energy should be either stored or curtailed, because you cannot have more generation than the demand. But if we collaborate and we connect the grids, then excess generation can be used on the other side of the border. So by collaboration, we can extremely reduce the amount of curtailment of energy, which is also an economic benefit of collaboration. And finally, we looked forward towards 2050 and net zero, and we found that collaboration is a great means of meeting net zero. Israel alone can probably not meet net zero because there is not enough land, not enough availability of the grid, and it also be very expensive. But by collaboration, we can use the availability of land and radiation on the Jordanian side, and this will economically benefit Jordan and will benefit the stability of Jordan, and at the same time, it will save some of the investment needed for meeting net zero. So the main conclusion of the model is that there is an economic benefit of collaboration, and now all we need is just to do it in real life. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurit. And the model itself is a very interesting tool, actually, for the different players, the different ministries of energy in Jordan, Israel, and Palestine, to decide on their strategic plan, like in the future, how much actually they can rely on their neighbor, and how much, also how much does that affect their investment in their infrastructure, and what can be offsetted by just importing that amount of energy, specific amount of energy. But also the story will not be complete without the water, or the picture about water, and Dr. Michael Gilmont will give us the explanation about the water model as well.
Thank you. So yeah, this is a brief overview of some of the work we've done on assessment of the water situation both today and through to 2030, and trying to paint an overview of what the situation looks like under current plans and what the potential could be under a more cooperative environment. So as Suleiman said in the introduction, we are using official government data that is actually, for the most part, publicly available to assemble both the historic picture of water over the last 10 years and also future projections. And the importance there is that we are working within the scope of current government plans and visions. What we see is that both absolute population growth and per capita demand increases compound the sort of resource scarcity going forward. And we see that at the regional scale, by 2030, there is insufficient planned resource to meet projected demand. So this is the picture for Israel on the left-hand side, we can see the supply and demand of water for 2019. It's broadly representative of the past decade. Obviously, there's been growth with population up to that period. And we can see that there is a slight surplus in supply over demand. And moving forward to 2030, we can see that picture replicated. The surplus based on current stated government policy is around 300 million cubic meters per year, and that's primarily due to increased targets for desalination development. But also we see a growth in treated wastewater through to 2030 as the supply to the domestic sector increases. Therefore, there is more potential for wastewater collection and reuse. So that's the broad picture for Israel. The Israeli plan actually extends through to 2050. And we have the numbers. We are currently throttled by the future plans for Jordan and Palestine, which are bounded more or less to 2030, or we've projected them to 2030. We are awaiting future numbers for 2040, 2050. So this is the picture for Jordan. There's currently a balance between supply and demand, and the projection through to 2030 appears to show a deficit of 116 million cubic meters per year. That, however, assumes that the Aqaba-Amman pipeline is completed, and that there is a significant development of desalination capacity in Aqaba to the tune of around 250 million cubes per year. That's obviously the stated policy target. If that isn't achieved on time, not saying it won't be achieved at all, but if it isn't achieved on time, then the deficit for 2030 could obviously be greater. The picture for Palestine is arguably even more severe. Again, there's currently a balance between supply and demand. 2030 projected supply is a little over half of the anticipated demand based on plans for agricultural expansion, which is self-derived from irrigated area and intended crop types, and also significant population growth and desire for increased per capita supply, which is currently way below WHO minima, and the target, the ambition for 2030 is that at the very least basic needs are are met. The net result of that is a deficit between planned water supply and anticipated demand of 431 million cubic meters per year. So that's the picture at the national level. And I should probably also say that certainly in Jordan, that deficit assumes continued unsustainable use or over-abstraction of groundwater. That's important because we're going to come back to that later. So hopefully it should be obvious that there is a role for regional cooperation. Firstly, if you potentially allocate at least some of the Israeli surplus, either on a permanent or a temporary basis, to help alleviate the water needs of its neighbours, that makes the scale of the challenge slightly less severe. But we also see, based on sort of regional best practice and achievement, significant potential of the regional approach. So the first is that Israel has tremendous success on reuse of treated wastewater. Jordan also has commendable success in that direction. If we move towards 50% net reuse of treated wastewater, so that's recovery and reuse of 50% of the water in the domestic sector into agriculture, that presents a potential significant new resource both for Jordan and for Palestine. Importantly, it requires 30% of the energy per cubic meter of desalination. So obviously the energy and therefore carbon intensity of that resource is significantly less than the desalination alternative. Desalination is clearly an important instrument going forwards. Yes, it's energy intensive. Yes, there's issues of access to the sea, certainly for the Jordanians and the Palestinians in the West Bank. Importantly, if it's then combined with recovery of treated wastewater, we can sort of understand that every cubic meter of new desalinated water going into the urban sector can equate to 1.5 cubic meters across both the urban and agricultural sectors if it's combined with appropriate recovery. Agricultural water use, there is a potential to revisit targets for agricultural growth. What growth can take place within lower ambitions for agricultural water allocation? I'm not suggesting reducing allocations to agriculture, but potentially reducing the growth of those allocations. And then leakage is something else that we don't consider in our scenarios yet, because it's very expensive to retrofit urban water systems, but there's potential to reduce leakage in non-revenue water, certainly in new urban supply systems as they come online. So we've got a couple of very basic scenarios. We see that under a regional projection of the deficit is not 116 plus 450. It reduces to 246 million cubic meters. If we recycle 50% of the water in the urban sector across, Israel's already meeting that target, across Palestine and Jordan, that would far exceed the deficit. That would give an additional 276 million cubic meters of water based on what would be available supply in 2030. Alternatively, if we consider that 50% recovery is too ambitious and it would be a huge leap between now and 2030, we could say let's go for 30%, which is actually more or less where Jordan is, but significant change for the Palestinians. That would give 167 million cubes, and the remaining deficit could be met by a reduction in new water to agriculture of 79 million cubes. That would still allow for a growth in agricultural water allocation, especially for treated wastewater, but the growth wouldn't be as large as anticipated in current policies. So a further scenario actually accounts for the over-abstraction of groundwater, certainly by Jordan. And then the deficit picture looks more severe, 550 million cubes. And again, we have various ways of meeting that through 50% wastewater recovery plus desalination, or again, a suite of agricultural growth reduction, 30% wastewater recovery, and a much smaller component of desalination. So what we're trying to illustrate here is that regional cooperation on water really increases the solution space for addressing the deficit. It also reduces the scale of that deficit. With an increased solution space comes new options for addressing the impacts of climate change in the region. Additional desal capacity and expertise can offer stability and resilience to the natural water system. Treated wastewater can do the same, but potentially with a much reduced energy intensity. It does inherently need cooperation in both technology and also infrastructure development to develop that resource. And also with positing based on best practice, especially in certain crops around the region, that agricultural growth can be pursued within lower targets for agricultural water.
Thank you very much, Michael. Unfortunately, we couldn't have our next speaker in person with us here. So he's joining us online. His Excellency Dr. Shaddad Atili, the former Minister of Water at the Palestinian Authority, and also one of the research fellows at the Oxford Martin School program at the University of Oxford. So, Dr. Shaddad, if you hear us.
Thank you, Dr. Suleiman. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you and good evening to you all. It's a missed opportunity not being able to be with you guys. But really very proud to be part of this team. And just I remind some of the colleagues, when I first entered into this project, I asked what's new about this project, yani how just to make sure that we were not doing a study that goes into shelf, because there is hundreds of study that has been done addressing water, energy, and food nexus and all this stuff. And this is Oxford-led research, and we would like to be kind of a unique study and something really different that we bring to the region. And this is what happened. We have been concluded the energy model as well as the water model, but this is still not perfect. Why it's not perfect? Because of the following issues that I would like to highlight in my intervention. And the first issues, as shown by the data and figures, and we're still talking about 2030, it's not 2050. And there is deficit, and there is a huge investment needed under even the cooperation model. Still, there is a huge investment needed. And if you read the two papers, you will see that we are addressing only the lower part of the Jordan River Basin, while we are talking regional. Regional, we have to address the whole basin, the Jordan River Basin, which means that we have to include Lebanon and Syria. Why is this? Because just the World Water Day slogan, they do not leave anyone behind. So we shouldn't leave the Syrian and Lebanese behind. So if the political reality doesn't or didn't permit to include them to address water energy need 2030, 2050 for the whole population in the region, including Syria and Lebanon, I would love that we work to address this gap and to complete our study to present a regional perspective where all people has to see figures. Why important to see figures? Because here, if politicians don't like to talk to each other, data and figures speaks on themselves. And so the second challenge, my colleague, how to package these results to the politician. The politicians are not water expert nor an energy expert. They're not knowing what does it mean and implication on food security. They do not know the implication of water, energy, food, okay, on social and political aspect. They do not know. And so our role is to package these results, these figures, okay, into a political, to the politician, maybe in a political initiative. We have to present this to our politician in each jurisdiction. More importantly, in this region, it's a conflict region that we didn't address, but we have to address and we have to tell. And there is many stakeholders involved, including the World Bank, including UN, including Quartet. We have to inform them about the findings and the result and the data, because here result and data do not lie. And then it's up to the politician where to take the different population. where to take them, whether to prosperity or to more miserable situation and to more conflicting time that we continue living in. Secondly, we're saying the whole world, it's a village. So if there is, and you are now at COP27 addressing different initiative in the Middle East, like Mohammed bin Salman Middle East Initiative, and also like the Chypriot Initiative, the East Mediterranean Climate Change Initiative. So the second, that initiatives need to talk to each other, because we have to address different components in the Middle East as well as in the East Mediterranean, and then to present our vision, how to protect and how to reduce and how to mitigate and how to adapt for the whole population living in this region, whether Middle East, MENA, or the East Mediterranean region. So we have to speak at the regional level. So politicians need to be aware of the outcome. Also communication with the public we have to address, because here we are driven with political factors, so we have to inform them why these results, why we need to cooperate, and why the huge investment is needed. And while talking about investment, we need also to take and address another component, which is the private sector engagement. Nurit spoke about 47 billion until 2030, which is after tomorrow. Who gonna come and bring 47 billion to be invested in this region while there is a conflict everywhere here? So we need to minimize conflict in order to encourage investors to come and step in to make the prosperity in terms of energy, in terms of food, in terms of water. So this component also, the investment component, need to be added in our next phase when we address water, energy, food for 2030, 2050, and how to make it a reality. We need also to address this component, which is related to investment. So I do not know if I did pass my time, or if there is still time left.
You can have a few more minutes if
Okay,
just to finish your. Yeah.
this is actually all, because the more important issue here is just to take the outcome and result to our politician, to our dear politician, and to tell them, listen, here, okay, if you would like to continue fighting, okay, but for this services element, water, energy, food, we would like to have some political initiative to depoliticize water, food, energy from the political context.
Yeah.
Because as the reality now, with this Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we're still purchasing water, we're purchasing electricity from Israel. So, but we just need to repackage this engagement, okay, resolving the water right conflict, resolving any conflict, and making an example to the politician that addressing the water, food, energy nexus, it could help. It could provide a good example for cooperation. It could also take the region to different levels, different steps. But we need to provide the good example, and provide a good example that needs that different parties working together.
Yeah.
It's not only academic, it's not only researcher, it's also a different stakeholder putting hand in hand to go forward. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Attili. And this is actually can be a very good transition into describing or discussing what is the continuation of this project, what our next steps are, and how we see this project playing a main component in, as an example of regional collaboration and cooperation. So what we have in our agenda in the project is like the next step will be sharing the outcomes of these models with professionals in the region. So we are planning a workshop in the next few months together with mainly professionals working on modeling in the different ministries in the Middle East, in order to discuss our approach and how that can be used, how can it be useful and used by them for their own benefit. And after that, try to include the policy involvement and the policy engagement at the decision-making level in how to utilize the outcomes of this project in future strategy making and planning. And of course, as Dr. Atili mentioned, the full picture should include more countries. If we talk about the Jordan River Basin, then of course Syria and Lebanon should be involved in this. We hope that one day we can get to that point. But also this approach can be a very interesting starting point to talk about more regional, if we talk about Middle East and North Africa, or even at a larger scale than that for the future. So in order to talk about how, like, the importance of this work from a regional level and from track 2 point of view, or track 2 diplomacy point of view, I would like to call Dr. Tariq Abu Hamad, the director of the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies, to share with us his ideas on that.
Okay, thank you, Suleiman. Actually, what we hear till now from our colleagues from Oxford is the scientific evidence of the importance of regional cooperation. And what we heard from Dr. Shaddad Al-Atili, to package these results and present them to the politicians. However, I believe that this is not enough. And this is what we try to do at the Arava Institute. What is lacking in the Middle East? We have plenty of peace treaties between Israel and its neighbors, with the Palestinians, with the Jordanians, with the Egyptians, with the latest Abraham Accords. Do we lack the natural resources and the technologies? And we clearly saw from the presentation of Oxford University that we have enough natural resources and we have the right technology to produce even extra amounts of water. What lacks in this region is trust. And the lack of trust prevents us from doing the regional cooperation, packaging these results and presenting them to the governments of the region. And this is what we try to do at the Arava Institute through the academic program, bringing Palestinians, Israelis, Jordanians from the whole region and educate them on the emerging climate challenges that we face in the region, in the whole Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean. And we all know that the Eastern Mediterranean is considered as a hotspot when it comes to climate change, not only through education, but also through research on renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, transboundary water management, social, ecological research, political research. And this is what we do at the Arava Institute, regional cooperation also on research. Most of the research that we do at the Arava Institute is we have the transboundary aspect, that we work with our Palestinian partners, with our Jordanian partners on pressing environmental issues. And that's why we decided at the Arava Institute to establish the Regional Climate Change Research Center. We all know that we are probably 30 miles or 50 kilometers from Aqaba, the location of the Arava Institute. We are 35 kilometers from Egypt, 60 kilometers from Saudi Arabia, and the Arava Institute has 25 years of experience in regional cooperation. That's why we decided to establish this important center at the Arava Institute that will have under its umbrella all the research centers that we have. For a few years, the Arava Institute decided to establish the Track 2 Environmental Forum to bring civil society organizations together to deal with climate issues, environmental challenges of the region. And as a result of that, we managed to establish and run many projects in the region to solve environmental issues, not only in the West Bank, but also in Gaza, in Israel, and also in Jordan. In one of the conferences, Dennis Ross, Track 2 conferences at the Arava Institute, Dennis Ross said, one of the major mistakes that we did in the peace negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that we ignored the bottom-up approach. And what Track 2 is is doing is the right way, actually, to combine it with track one, the bottom approach. And we know from the results on the ground, the projects, the mega scale projects that we managed to conduct in the region, it's only based on the technique or the model that we use to build the trust. And once you build the trust, the rest of things, packaging the results, presenting them to politicians, becomes just a technicality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a little bit more than 10 minutes for questions. If anyone has a question, this is your chance.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much. You introduced here energy and water, and I'm wondering which is more difficult to make headway in, or which is more likely or has more possibility to move ahead with.
So, who would like to start, Nurit or Michael? Ladies first, I guess.
Well, that's a good question. But I think that we have one example of the energy moving forward with the Prosperity Green project of the Emirates already going forward, which means that there is a potential for energy collaboration. It's already happening. And we can also learn a lot from this project on the challenges of the implementation. Although the economic benefits are clear, as we have seen here, there are still challenges of implementation. One of them is the financial aspect, because the project is only connected to the Israeli grid, and therefore it means that if there is any political event in the future which will disable the purchase of the energy, the project will remain on the Jordanian side and the energy will not be paid. So this is a huge financial risk. So although it is moving forward, we need to solve these implementation issues in order to really make it happen, if this answers the question.
So I would say, so from a research and analysis perspective, I think both water and energy have had their own technical and data challenges. I think reflecting what Nurit said, there is a reality on the ground. We're seeing increased potential purchases of water from Israel by Jordan, driven primarily by Jordan's need, and there is the facts on the ground often will speak for themselves and will, I think, drive change come what may. I think the potential here from the work that we're doing and the scenarios we're trying to build is to preemptively move in that direction rather than waiting until there is an absolute, there's already an absolute pressing need, but really leaving things to the last minute. Having agreements from 1 year to the next in terms of water supply. There is tremendous potential. There is an emerging reality. I think there's a need to leap a few more steps ahead to try and cement those movements.
I want to follow up with a question of my own, but in the same spirit. There are issues of water rights. There aren't issues of energy rights. And doesn't that create difficulties for one that don't exist for the other?
Yes, there are issues of water rights, and that is an elephant in the room. I think regardless of who has the right to what water, the analysis is pretty clear that there is not enough water, full stop, in the region to meet future population needs, to say nothing of future population and environment needs. Even under the sort of current plans to 2030, the environment is being over abstracted, certainly for Jordan, for the Palestinians as well, and for Israel. There's decades of over abstraction of groundwater and a need for much more rehabilitation than there is. So when you're looking at the scale of the challenge, there's a need for more water, come what may. It's then a political question of who gets what entity of water, although when you're dealing with a grid as in the Israeli case, it becomes a bit moot. But it really then becomes a question of who pays for what water, who pays who for what water. And yes, that is a political decision, a political negotiation that needs to be made. I think no one's saying it can be brushed under the carpet forever. But if there isn't the infrastructure developed to create that capacity, then by the time you've reached that agreement on water rights, you're then, again, 5, 10, 15 years behind the curve. So get that capacity in and then have that. Basically, it's a financial negotiation at the end of the day, I think. It's probably simplifying it too much.
I would also to check if Dr. Shaddad has any comment on this.
I think we have to present ideas to politicians regarding, for example, the water right. One big desalination facility, it could resolve the whole region problem in terms of water. So the political dimension of the water right can be really addressed. So I just would like to remind that what has been presented by Michael and Nurit is just 2030. Is just the investment needed under the cooperative approach. If we don't cooperate, the figure, the 47, it's multiply even. It become even the situation become even worse. So let's build in the good spirit, and let's say that we need to work hard, because especially in the water model, the team has considered the completion of Aqaba desalination facility, which is not, if we don't meet the investment, if we don't find the investment needed, it will not be built. The model has been also assumed the Gaza desalination facility is already built. This is why even we address figures that really still under the assumption that there is an investment done and all of that. If we don't address the investment component and the environment to enable investment, that will be really problematic. And this is also an outcome of the study, which the politician need to address. But I will conclude that we need to create the environmental enabler or the enabling environment in the region. And we don't forget, if Lebanon is in, the water model become really more prosperous in the region. If Syria in, it's again, okay, the energy model, okay, become also more attractive. So let's not lose hope, even we're in more than 50 years of conflict, but let's bring a new element because it's a new reality that we are living in, and there's a new threat adding to it, the climate change. If we like to address it, if not, we are paying a heavy price.
Thank you. And Dr. Tariq, you wanted to say something?
Actually, just to add to what Dr. Shaddad said, the cooperation on water and energy is a great contributor to the stability of the Eastern Mediterranean. And stability and peace in the Eastern Mediterranean means stability and peace on the rest of the Mediterranean.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, very good question, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. So, thanks very much for all the presentations. When I was listening through the models, one thing that was popping up in mind, and actually Dr. Shaddad mentioned it, is the issue of investments. Are you guys thinking about presenting or complementing your assumptions and your models with what are the financial costs? So if I'm thinking with the water model, all that infrastructure, it all costs money, you know, right. So is there a way to start plugging in some numbers so that, for example, what Dr. Shaddad was saying on those investment questions, we can start to get a sense of that? Because I think when you guys are going to go and present your results to the politicians, a lot of them are just thinking about money. And I think if we can get some economic understandings of how these models may work, it can also help in when you're having those discussions with the track one people. I think the track 2 are less focused on those things, but the track 1 are certainly focused on those things. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure that Nourit has a lot to say about this, and maybe Michael as well. So we'll start with Nourit again.
I think you're right. It's actually all about money. And actually the energy model is it's the minimize the investment given that we wish to meet the target. It's that's the constraint of the model, but it's all about minimizing investment. And the input for the model is the expected cost per PV capacity, storage capacity, it's a natural gas capacity, etc. And then the result of the model, the output is where to put this investment. Where would it make, where can you meet the target with the smallest investment? So money is totally there. And money is also the incentive for the implementation. I mean, the Abraham Accord are not here, they are here for stability, etc. But the incentive for the private sector to participate comes from the investment. So as far as I see it, it's money and it's good, you know. It is increasing the investment in the Jordanian side will stabilize the Jordanian economy. The Emirates are coming for the investment and the return on the investment. Israel would like to minimize the investment and meet the targets. So it's all about the money, but it's a in good faith, you know, of meeting targets in a good way.
Yeah, thank you, Kai, for that question. It shouldn't be a difficult calculation to do in terms of sort of the bulk infrastructure, desal costs, cost of treating a cubic meter of wastewater, or there's conveyance costs on top of that. And yeah, that is definitely some work that we should do. There's also obviously the cost of inaction, and certainly in terms of untreated wastewater coming from the West Bank and flowing into Israel. The Palestinians are currently billed by the Israelis for treatment of that water. The water then isn't really used as a maximized resource, so that's a sort of significant direct cost. There's the environmental cost to both the Palestinians and the Israelis of the status quo. So that's already a negative number that could be spotlighted and potentially be alleviated by investment. There's also a question of scales of investment, and again, if we look at the treated wastewater side of things, the cost and how much of that treated wastewater target could be met by sort of large centralized systems, how much could be met by smaller decentralized systems, what the relative costs would be, what the timescales for development. So it's not necessarily a straightforward answer, but yes, that should be part of the conversation.
Yeah. And if I may add also, Michael, like one of the main issues or one of the main outcomes here is like not only to talk about the cost of the investments needed for that, it's also to compare the different options and the different scenarios of collaboration and what is the saving and what is the amount of investment needed for that. So it gives a very good detailed decision-making tool that can be used in that aspect as well. I think we have like 2 more minutes, so time for one more question. Yeah.
Okay. So, Dr. Abu Hamid, Tarek spoke about building trust in order to make all these technicalities. But what I'm kind of hearing from the rest of the panel is that if we appeal to everybody's self-interest financially and the targets they've set and other things, then that will build, I think you even outright said it, Nuri, that will build trust afterwards. So I'm going to ask you all the difficult question of what's the reconciling between those two approaches? Sort of, but as they say in the Talmud, do the thing first and the thinking about it will come later, and the meaning will come later, or try and get the meaning first and then do the thing. Thank you.
Maybe Richard, would you like to?
Well, I mean, I think they go hand in hand, actually. I think that the process even of, if you will, diagnosis is in itself inherently trust building, to the extent that, first of all, there has to be a degree of cooperation to provide and share data, and that's already been happening. And there has to be a recognition of the mutual gains, even if they're driven by national self-interest. There's a recognition that it only works as part of a cooperative arrangement. So I don't know if it's really either or I mean I'm inclined to think of this as as a process of simultaneously building trust at the same time as pursuing self-interests.
If I can just say, I think one of the potential challenges that we face is, yes, the enlightened self-interest narrative is very powerful. We need to make sure, I think, in the coming months and years ahead, that the interest in putting down the other doesn't trump the potential self-interest of any one party, if that isn't too cryptic.
I think both go hand by hand. But once you build the trust, it becomes much easier to implement mega projects like this one. And a great example of that is when Jordan signed the agreement with Israel on the gas. And the public were always objected this project, and Jordan had to sign it. Because of what happened in Sinai. Jordan needs the natural gas to continue producing the electricity. Can you imagine just signing such an agreement when you have the support of the public, when you have the trust, and the public will be supportive of such projects?
Yep. So thank you very much. And with this, I would like to conclude this panel. Thank you very much for being here, and I would like to thank all the speakers that we have today and the Mediterranean Pavilion for this chance again. Thank you very much.